In 2018, Naval Postgraduate School's Captain Wayne Hughes with co-author Admiral Robert Guerrier released the third edition of Fleet Tactics and Naval Operations. The final two editions include a fictional battle of the Aegean set in a future battle space. This fictional naval battle draws on lessons learned from earlier mastered tacticians and includes quandaries for current students of naval tactics to ponder. Captain Hughes, you open all three editions of Fleet Tactics with the Battle of the Nile in 1798, one of Horatio Nelson's greatest victories, and then close with an imaginary battle. These are like bookends for each edition. What should the reader be looking for?
I want to make the reader feel like he's there. I want him to have a sense of what the tactical commander and the theater commander felt like and what their problems were as they didn't know everything. They had to anticipate, they had to judge. Particularly in the Battle of the Nile, I wanted to point out that although Nelson never talked about six cornerstones, that they logically flowed and they're sturdy things we talked about before, like sailors matter most and the seat of purpose is on the land. That kind of thing has carried over all the way through and are constants in the book.
Could you describe this imaginary Battle of the Aegean for us in a few words?
I can't do it in a few words, but the reader does deserve to have an idea of what the battle is like, or it's really a campaign. Our intelligence finds out that the Turkish have a very clever plan to retake 5 of the Greek islands that are right up close to the west coast of Turkey, and it involves Cyprus. The president wants us to intervene, so he goes to the Greek president and persuades him to keep his forces out and says, let me try and contain the Turkish. And the president of Greece has a hard time doing that because his blood is up too. But he's willing to let the Americans try. So the American theater commander, who is a naval officer, places his forces first to prevent the Turkish forces from attacking Cyprus. But the Turks aren't having anything of it, so they fire missiles, land-based missiles at our ships, and even though we shoot down most of them, they put one out of action, and while it's doing damage control, another ship comes to protect it, and then they fire some more missiles, and there's another missile gets through, and so we've lost 2 ships put out of action. Meanwhile, the Turkish amphibious ships start to come to Cyprus, but what they don't know is we've got 2 SSNs lurking, and they put enough of the amphibious ships out of action to stop that part of the battle. Undeterred, the Turks plan to go ahead and send their amphibious ships across the eastern Aegean and seize the 5 islands. And so Admiral Grant's problem now is to prevent that, and the rest of the story is how we cleverly and sneakily are able to put the amphibious ships out of action using some short-range theater ballistic missiles that we don't yet have but ought to have, and prevent the landings.
And by Admiral Grant, you were talking about the fictional Ulysses S., or known as Sam Grant.
Ulysses S. Sam Grant, yes. I loved General Grant in the Civil War, so I borrowed that name, and he's my naval commander.
I see. You're trying to put the reader in the shoes of the commander and his captains. In this imaginary battle, what are some of the things you want the reader to take away?
Well, one of them is that our big ships, even though they are highly effective, sooner or later 1 or 2 of them are going to get put out of action, and that complicates the commander's whole operation. I want to point out that our modern submarines can lurk and be undetected and therefore can be very effective, but our SSNs are costly, so they should be operating in deep water, and I don't think they should be going into mineable waters like the West Coast, and therefore we need something else to be able to forestall the amphibious ships when they try and seize the Greek islands along the West Coast in the Aegean. I want to point out that modern warfare involves deception. It involves a lot of things that we need to be practicing to get ready to fight in the modern 21st century.
You mentioned earlier that this battle was more like a campaign. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
It's definitely more like a campaign, and that's fitting because the third edition's title is Fleet Tactics and Naval Operations. I did that, chose that title because the U.S. hasn't fought a battle at sea since World War II. We've fought and operated continuously, and so operations has been a domain. And so I introduced a new chapter in the new edition. I should mention that the new edition's co-author is Bob Guerrier, and he was a big help in bringing the new edition up to date. But in the chapter on naval operations, we point out the constants, the trends, and the variables of operations as well as combat tactics. It is a series of battles. They're interwoven, they're interconnected, and it is so more like a campaign than a single battle.
You used the Battle of the Aegean in both the second and third editions without any changes. Does this mean you think nothing changed between 1999 and 2018?
No, on the contrary. I take that approach so I can show by repeating the battle what has changed, because then I do a post-mortem, point out how the introduction of unmanned vehicles, cyber operations, information warfare, other modern technologies are going to give us a better chance to win the battle with fewer losses. I also use it as an opportunity to repeat some of my favorite heroes like Sam Grant, and the names of some of the Turkish and Greek leaders are the names of former Greek and Turkish students I had, because I have a lot of them. And then I also use it as an opportunity to talk about some of my commanders. Commander Reddy Gridley, for example, is named after the the captain who commanded the ship, the flagship at the Battle of Manila Bay. And in that battle, Dewey said, "You may fire when ready, Gridley." And so I have Sam Grant tell Reddy Gridley, "Your weapons are free." Stephanie Decatur is one of the captains of one of the detachments that deliver the weapons against the Turkish amphibious ships, and she is nominally the daughter of Stephen Decatur, who was one of our finest officers in the Tripolitanian Wars and later commanded 7 different sailing ships in the U.S. Navy. It was a pleasure to think up those names and then use them again.
Last question. You don't describe the end of the battle. You just have a wind-up you call the denouement. Why did you take that approach?
If I was writing a novel, I would have had to write the end. I wanted to give the readers a chance to think about several different possibilities for the way that battle might end. So instead of having one specific ending, I give the reader a chance to think about several possibilities. For example, the Turkish tactical commander has been a lifelong friend of Admiral Grant's, and they know each other and they know how they think. And so there's a distinct possibility that it's going to be hard for Grant to employ his deception, because the Turkish commander is certainly going to be on the lookout for whatever he thinks Admiral Grant is going to do. Similarly, the Turkish Navy has harpoons too, so they're practiced against harpoons. If the deception force fights a battle and we're greatly outnumbered, and so the Turkish force is going to win, but we have to sacrifice ourselves and take out as many of the Turkish ships as we can, and we are both firing harpoons, and there's lots of speculation on how we can do the best we can in these different circumstances. So the denouement is intended to not give one final answer, but to keep the reader's mind open to the different possibilities.
Well, thank you, Wayne, for another engaging discussion about the third edition of Fleet Tactics.
My pleasure.
Thank you for taking a moment to view a discussion on the fictional Battle of the Aegean as part of our series of interviews with Captain Wayne Hughes on the third edition of his book, Fleet Tactics. We hope you will take a moment to view other episodes in this series.